Hi, I'm Rob Spaull.
And I'm Brit Garner.
Welcome to Nature Insight.
Speed dating with the future. This is the podcast of the Intergovernmental Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, also known as IPBES. Thanks for joining us as we uncover the countless ways that the science and policy of biodiversity influence, shape, and often benefit all of our lives. This is your chance to connect with the often unexpected insights of those on the front lines of biodiversity research and action.
Brit, you're home at the moment. That's in Boston, right?
Yep, right over the river from downtown. I'm technically in Cambridge, right outside of Boston.
Well, as you know, I've lived for a number of years now in Germany. In fact, from before we started our podcast back in 2020. So Boston and Bonn, about 6,000 kilometers apart. Both begin with the letter B. What else do they have in common?
B makes me think of beer.
That's what makes you think of beer, huh? Okay.
I mean, it's got to be a through line. I'm thinking, Boston has a ton of craft breweries. Bonn, it's got those beer killers, yeah?
I see that. Beer aside, both Bonn and Boston are cities, although Bonn is much smaller. We have about 350,000 people compared to the city of Boston, which I believe is about double that size. But as we like to say, Bonn is the little city on the Rhine River with the big heart. Because when it comes to environmental sustainability, for instance, Bonn is a really big player. Last year, the city won a European award for its commitment to forests and to climate action, and it has a lot of concrete plans and actions to become climate neutral by 2035.
Which is great, but, objectives like that seem beyond the reach for many cities around the world. I'm thinking of challenges like overcrowding and pollution and lack of green spaces.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you said concrete solutions. That made me think of concrete jungles, right? Cities, yes, are many times more concrete than jungle.
Okay, so how is it possible then to balance the needs of people with the needs of nature in our concrete jungles?
Well, that is a question that occupies Loan Diep, who is the assistant director of the Urban Systems Lab, which is an interdisciplinary research, design, and practice space at New York University. And my first question to Loan was what she would consider to be an ideal city.
An ideal city is one that has good urban planning, which manages to integrate biodiversity into the built environment, including in densely built cities. And so that means moving away from the dichotomy that says it's nature or cities. It's nature or the built environment. No, it's cities with nature. It's not only, by the way, an opportunity, it's a necessity. We are talking about 4 billion people living in cities around the world. It's an estimated 58% of people who live in urban areas. Many are vulnerable to not one, but multiple climate hazards. So it's very important that we think that biodiversity is needed within cities.
Working within nature-based solutions, I mean, that phrase is packed. There's words inside of that have millions of definitions. For you, how would you describe nature-based solutions? Like, what are they solutions to? What are examples? Tell us more.
A widely received definition is that nature-based solutions are actions to protect, restore, and sustainably manage natural and semi-natural ecosystems to address societal challenges that can range from climate change, health issues, environmental justice, and as they do so, they provide co-benefits to both people and nature simultaneously. A lot of people ask for more concrete types of terminology. So people ask that instead of talking about nature-based solutions, we actually are talking about restoration of wetlands, we are talking about building green infrastructure for stormwater management, etc. But for me, this is important, but also the value of using the umbrella concept of nature-based solutions is that it helps us to create bridges. It helps us to create bridges between different disciplines, whether we're talking about architecture, urban planning, ecology, engineering, philosophy, arts, but also bridges between academics, governmental authorities, non-profits, and the public. A lot of this is deeply political. When you think about nature-based solutions, you have to think about what benefits goes where. Find a way that doesn't reproduce historical exclusionary patterns where the most marginalized keep being excluded from nature.
When you think of nature-based solutions and community involvement, examples that have worked particularly well, specifically from cities, can you think of one, or is there an approach that you thought was particularly effective?
The first example that I always feel excited to talk about is Freetown, the Tree Town campaign, which is a city-led initiative by the city of Freetown in Sierra Leone in West Africa, which was conceptualized as a project to plant 1 million trees in the Western Peninsula. And we are talking about a city that is extremely vulnerable to a whole range of risks. This is a city that went through an Ebola crisis, that goes through regular flood episodes, landslides as well. There is a lot of poverty issues. And so this was a very ambitious campaign when they proposed to plant 1 million trees. And so not only they have succeeded in doing this, but what I really like about this project, it has done this in a very inclusive ways. Volunteering growers can get to plant seeds, and they are obviously guided in the process of knowing where to plant them, but they become the stewards of those trees, and they monitor their growth, which is a very important aspect of the project itself. So the people take pictures, and then you have a team of technicians that verify the growth, and then when they are big, they enter a carbon market. They are associated to a token, which gives them a value, and this whole process enables the campaign to self-sustain.
What are some of the dangers of making assumptions about the values or relationship different people have with these spaces? You know, what happens if you don't actually take into account those complexities that you were mentioning?
When we do projects, we need to understand what it means for the local people living in those spaces instead of imposing what we think those human-nature relationships should look like. We need to understand how this integrates into people's everyday lives. So I conducted my doctoral thesis research in 2 favelas, what we call favelas, although we tend to avoid this term. We also avoid the term slum because it carries a lot of connotations. So we call it peripheral areas of São Paulo in Brazil. And so one of them, called Sapé, has been going through changes where the river, which is understood as a danger because it floods, because it carries a lot of waste, whether it's sewage, has been going through this change because the sea has wanted to depollute this river. It's part of a wider ecosystem. And to build things like linear parks, regreen the riverbank and create recreational areas, even cycling lanes along the river, so people could also take advantage of this space for commuting, etc. The thing is, the local population that I met for my research were not always in agreement with this project. A lot of people, in fact, expressed the will to bury the river, or at least to channelize the river, which we know from the ecosystem or from the ecological perspective can be harmful to the river itself, and also it displaces the flood risk downstream. But when you start talking to the people, you understand there are many reasons behind their desire to bury or to channelize the river, which is not necessarily that they don't care about the river or about nature, but it's years of political dispute, it's years of mismanagement of waste, of neglect around housing and access to land. And many people said, we want to move on, and burying the river is a way for us to just not only leave all of this behind, remember that Sao Paulo is one of the cities, like many other cities, including Europe and US, that have channelized rivers for decades. And this is a practice that is associated to the modern city. And so people in those informal settlements, many of them also consider that if you do such intervention, they will be part of the modern city. It's all these reasons that do not necessarily reflect people's lack of connection to nature. In fact, I also found that there were countless initiatives led by these people to take care of the local environment. They have been leading river cleaning campaigns. They have been building community gardens, including herbal gardens. So there is a lot of potential to support those community-led initiatives with regard to biodiversity.
I wonder, thinking about community gardens and these local kind of initiatives. I briefly lived in New York. I currently live in the Boston area. I'm surrounded by these small little pockets. And I know for me that they brought a lot of joy, even in these small moments. For you, living in New York now, have you had experiences with things like that? Those local scale community gardens and biodiversity and social inclusivity?
Yes. I used to live in a house where we had a backyard, but then I moved to an apartment and I was very much missing a space where I could take care of plants and grow different sort of things. And so my roommate told me, I am part of a garden around here, you should join us. And this has been one of the most wonderful things that happened actually over the past years, because I met a whole group of people who deeply care about plants and who deeply care about the community and who deeply care about the neighborhood. And that's through this initiative that I think you really build placemaking and connection with your area and the people in those areas.
It sounds amazing from the outside, just hearing you discuss it. How does that feel?
It feels wonderful because New York City, in my opinion, is a harsh city. You feel lonely sometimes. And so being part of this reminds you that you're not alone and that there are people around you that also care and they share similar values and they want to create a support network. If I'm away, I know that someone will water my plant, or they will bring me some tulip bulbs that they have as extra. This happened literally last week. And just people caring around you gives a lot of sunshine in your life, I think.
Brit, I love that Luan started your interview out by making the point that that dichotomy between nature or cities was really a false dichotomy, and it has to be cities with nature.
Yeah, this is really big to me personally, as someone who teaches, biology and ecology here in a city. Just reminding people that the city itself is this thriving, a massive connected ecosystem of its own. And it's just so important to keep that in mind as a starting point.
And not to have this false barrier, which we create ourselves through language, reduce our ability to actually address some of these issues. What I loved also about the interview was how Luan talked about nature-based solutions as being able to bridge different kinds of disciplines, different kinds of approaches. And it reminded me of something that you've said a number of times over all of our seasons about the importance of multidisciplinary approaches.
Yeah, it's so cool to hear it happening in real time, and the fact that these sorts of solutions needed for cities. Multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, it's what we gotta do.
Something really resonated with me when Luan talked about how when she moved from a house to an apartment in New York City, she was missing space to grow and missing the opportunity of taking care of things. I mean, apart from the fact that that's a really relatable need, and I think many of our listeners who live in cities may feel similarly, and perhaps this might motivate them to find out about the communities of green space in their areas. On a personal note, it also resonated with my family's experience because you might remember, we were living for many years in one of the biggest cities in the world, in Bangkok, Thailand.
Right.
14 million people, and this incredibly huge conurbation. And then we moved to Bonn with its relatively small population. And one of the first things that happened when we got here was we went to one of the big green spaces, the big park in the center of the city. And my 2-year-old daughter at the time rolled down a grassy hill for the first time in her life. And she stood up
Aw.
and she had this huge grin on her face. And my wife and I turned to each other. We're like, yep, I think this might work for us as a city.
This
And,
will do.
it would. It has. It's been a fantastic, almost, what's the right word? Bucolic. It's a small city, 350,000 people. It's on the river. It's got all of this access to rural green space within easy reach. So it's been good for us.
Those who have listened to this podcast since we started might remember that home, in my mind, at least for a huge swath of my adult life, was Montana. And so
Yes.
you talking about Bonn being bucolic is hysterical because, I was living in the second largest city in the state of Montana and we were under 100K. Like, easily.
You were howling with wolves. That was one of our first episodes. I remember that.
You better believe it. So we went from there to New York City, and that was oppressive. Although those green spaces that Loan was speaking of, kind of made like all of the difference for both of our kind of mental health, physical health, all of it. And so coming now to Boston, I remember when we kind of got out of the vehicle, kind of just took a breath. And it's not a difference in air quality of Manhattan or Boston. It's just there was a feeling of being more free, or being able to almost like put one's shoulders down and feel space. And it's kind of indescribable, but was very, very apparent. So I'd say it's all relative.
And there's differences between different types of cities. I thought also came out in the interview, because one of the thoughts I had while we were listening to Luan was how challenging it must be to take on biodiversity projects in different types of any kind of city, really, whether it's an existing city that you're trying to add more green spaces, more biodiversity inclusive spaces to, or if it's a relatively new city or one that's really exploding with new population growth.
Right. There are so many different options as far as what a city might be. And honestly, that's sort of why you need a guide on how to do it. What's cool is that I actually spoke to someone who did exactly that. And that is Carolina Figueroa. Carolina is the director of SELVAR, which is a think and do tank based in Colombia. And she's also published a book called Integrating Nature-Based Solutions in Cities from the Global South. And it's a hands-on guide for embedding nature in city planning and urban design. And she talked me through the approach to implementing nature-based solutions for cities.
Very close to my apartment, I have a protected area. That is a big forest in the mountains of the city of Bogota, Colombia, where I'm based. So I started to walk these mountains, and as a political scientist, I start asking myself, like, why do we have this type of places in some cities and in others we don't? And when thinking about that question as a political scientist, I thought, this is the result of a decision that someone or a group of people made at some point in the history. And as a result, today we have a protected land, which otherwise could just have been now a built land. And as I was walking through that mountain over and over again, I just nurtured that reflection and that argument, that we need to improve our decisions so that cities have more nature, because we need nature in our cities. If we use wisely the concept of nature-based solutions, combining with other strategies and governance strategies, we can use nature-based solutions for providing multifunctional benefits that will help people, nature, and climate. The solving problems is very broad, and it can encompass different types of problems that can start from challenges such as climate change, water scarcity, but also stress, air quality.
Have you always been interested in, or kind of felt yourself attracted to, problem solving, just in terms of process and what interests you?
Oh my God. Yes. Sometimes I see myself as a methodologist. I don't know. I like to solve problems, but I like to structure also the way we approach problems. So I ended up writing a step by step guide. So, how to get people to think through this problem. The process and the method that I propose in the book takes you from a very general aspects where you need to consider the geography, the map of the city, understanding where your natural features are in the city, to implementing nature based solutions in prioritized spaces. So we go from identifying availability, identifying challenges, to prioritizing spaces, and then giving the recipe, or at least the ingredients you need to consider when implementing nature based solutions, because the recipe will depend on the place. I cannot give a specific recipe, but I can give the ingredients, and then you are, as a cook, you decide how to mix them.
In this analogy, who is the cook? Who are the different chefs you are speaking to that you would like to see implement said recipes?
Yeah, so there's many types of chefs. So you have people working in the municipality, decision makers, for example, planning offices, environmental offices. You have also construction companies that decide how they want to occupy and shape a type of land. Of course, there are rules that they need to follow that are rules by the city, but also there is room for integrating nature in a way that nature can benefit the project, you know? So, what would be the advantages for a construction company for integrating nature based solutions? Well, you can, for example, start selling apartments where your views can be to a garden or to a forest, or where you can do some activities outdoors in a, it doesn't have to be a big space, but at least you can have access to a garden or access to a food garden, you know? Community and community organizations are also an audience, because there are lots of groups at the city level that work on safeguarding these type of spaces in the city, or creating, like, for example, food gardens. There's many of them, or creating other strategies for food composting and so on.
It's so interesting that you were able to suggest and lay out this kind of plan, like you said, methods. Did you see any of these actually implemented? Like, did you see successes using these steps? Tell us about the reality of making these ideas go from think to do.
Yes, it was very exciting to write the book, but it was more exciting to bring it into practice.
Totally.
So we were lucky to apply for a grant also provided by the German government, and we received funding for implementing the 7 steps of the book into Colombian cities. So there was a team working with me on this task. We worked on this project for 2 years. We also published another book on lessons learned, and it was fascinating because it worked. We worked with communities in 2 different cities, and both of the contexts of these urban parks that we decided to work with had very challenging social contexts. So one of them was in particular dangerous in a way. There was drug trafficking, and there were murders in the park. There was lots of waste, because here very often the victims of waste from constructions and buildings are wetlands. So there's informal trucks that just take all this waste into these beautiful places. So they become like dump sites, you know? But when we went there and we saw that there was lots of birds, because birds are also very resilient, that was still there, you know. In some places it didn't smell very well, but some leaders of the community, they said, we are interested in this project because we want to change the face and the reality of this place. And for us, that was like the bell, you know, that told us, yes, this is the place. It's going to be challenging, but you have people that are interested and you have a need. And after that, the place has changed a lot, like completely. We built with a landscape architect and with an ecologist and a wetland expert a space for restoration, but also for recreation, you know? Kids were so happy.
Aw.
They were moving around, they were planting trees. Yeah, it was very surreal, you know, the support that we had from the community. In short, we make this theory into practice, and from practice we learned. We published this book, and then we got a new book that was published last year, which is a remake of the book, now in English, for the Global South with guest authors. And there is a diversity of situations. For example, the most biodiverse places in Indian cities are sacred sites where you
Mm.
find the oldest trees, where you find, of course, what brings old trees, habitat for different types of species of birds and insects. I also have invited a lady from Lebanon, and she writes about an example of integrating nature in a city where they didn't find any place to work with nature. So they decided to recreate nature in an unfinished bridge. There is a very interesting case from Jordan, an architect that has been working a lot and thinking about how to adapt, you know, nature in cities that have like very little water. So I think it's fascinating to see this diversity, because it opens and expands the mind of, you don't need nature only when you have water. You know, there's possibilities where for ecosystems that are very different.
Is the Global South in general something that interests you within research? And if so, why? What is the connection of these steps and methods to these regions in particular?
Nature and the Global South has not been a priority for urban planning at all.
Mm.
Many of our cities have been growing in a very disorganized manner and very rapid as well. So when those things are combined, increasing population, rapid urbanization, saving space for nature is a waste of money, seen through the eyes of many. It's a high opportunity cost for the city to reserve spaces for nature, because nature will not pay taxes as landowners will pay when they have buildings and houses and so on. So this contradiction is also an opportunity for change.
Thinking of opportunities and thinking about that vision, what would you say describes sort of the ideal city built with environment and with biodiversity in mind? What does it look like? What does it feel like?
Well, now that I'm going to become a mother in a few months, I would love that I can go out with the stroller walking directly from my house to a park, sit in nature, eat an apple, a sandwich, or whatever, and, you know, just to have a peaceful moment. That would be the dream for me. I don't know all the cities in this planet, but Berlin for me was an inspiration. For me, ideally, is to be able to walk from my house, getting to this place in a 10-15 minute walk, and being able to walk for as long as I can across the city, because these parks are connected. That would be my dream. If we take care of those details in a small scale into the bigger scale, we can transform our cities.
Wow, Brit, I really loved so many parts of that interview, and I particularly loved your introduction to it, where you talked about the fact that Carolina was from a think and do tank, because it
Mm-hmm.
came through in a huge number of the answers she was giving. She connects her passion for, peaceful moments in city green spaces with some really straightforward, common sense approaches to doing things, especially the need to improving the decisions in order to get more nature in cities.
Yeah, and decisions and planning matrices, it actually makes me think of a lot of the work that IPBES does. And
Ah.
Yes, and as a teaser, I know that there is another IPBES assessment, probably released somewhere in 2027, I believe,
Yep.
coming out about biodiversity inclusive spatial planning and connectivity.
You might remember Carolina talked in her description of what her ideal city would look like. She said she would love green spaces that you could walk between one to the other without any kind of interruption, that would connect to each other and flow into each other. And the spatial planning and connectivity assessment that you're talking about has that extra component, the connectivity element, really looking at how we go about connecting protected areas in a way that is good for people and good for nature.
When you study wildlife biology and talk about the threats to biodiversity, habitat fragmentation is the number one, I think, kind of inarguably. And so it's funny, like the things that we are trying to build for non-human animals, this idea of like connectivity for things like gene flow and for things like exchange of individuals, we need it for ourselves as well. Like connectivity is everything, both
Taking
literally.
that baby stroller through the
Yeah.
park.
Exactly, which just so clearly resonated with Carolina as well.
If any of our listeners are interested to find out more about Carolina's book, which we've talked about and she mentioned, you'll find some details about that in the show notes for this episode.
So that's it for this episode of Nature Insight, Speed Dating with the Future. I'm Brit Garner.
And I'm Rob Spaull. We hope you've enjoyed this episode, and you can learn more about IPBES's work on www.ipbes.net or on any of our social media channels. Just search for @IPBES. That's @IPBES. And don't forget to subscribe to Nature Insight wherever you get your podcasts.